everybody. You're listening to Fireside Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jordan Cline, and as always, I got a great show planned out today. My guest tonight is Chris Balzano. He is an author and podcaster. Before we get to him, though, just a few announcements. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. For the first time in the history of the internet, the entire web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. Stop scrolling, start listening. You can follow any topic as specific as you'd like, from sports, science, to Bitcoin, or even the Kardashians. It'll find you the latest articles and read them to you aloud. They also have podcasts, so explore trending podcasts from over 50 countries. My show, Fireside Paranormal Podcast, is there too. Download and use Newsly for free now from www.newsly.me or from the link in the description, and use promo code FIRESIDE where the eyes are ones. I'll also put that in the description, and you receive 1 month free premium subscriptions. I also want to give a shout out for American Paranormal Magazine. Their next issue is going to feature Fireside Paranormal Podcast, so make sure you get it because it's going to be amazing. I also really want to say Happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. Keep doing what you're doing. Raise them up the way they should go. And definitely a tip of the hat to all the moms that are pulling double duty. You know, you don't go unnoticed. I actually have a special guest host this week, Miss Sarah. Got my wife here with me.
Hey, everyone.
So if you hear her popping in every now and then, you know I love her, and she is doing a great job. Thanks, baby. We started our Patreon this past month, really kicking it into gear, and every week we've been doing our name drop. Well, this week our name drop is Scott Briding. Thank you, Scott, for joining up and showing your support for the show. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/firesideparanormal. We have 4 different tiers. Our $1 tier gets you a name drop and 1 bonus audio. Our $3 tier gets you a name drop, a 1-inch sticker, and 2 bonus audio. Our $5 tier is a name drop, 3-inch sticker, and all bonus audio. And then we have our $20 tier we call Join Me by the Fire, where we do a drawing for all the members in that group, and the winner gets to join me on the show. So if you want to support the show, if you want to be involved, it really does help me out. We do have some goals, like some new equipment, some new merch we're trying to get together. Really, really, really do appreciate everybody who's pitching in and helping me. And like I said, patreon.com/firesideparanormal if you want to help. I've said before, one thing I really like about doing this show is that I've met some really cool podcasters in the paranormal podcast world. One of those is the show Middle Aged and Creeped Out. I want to play the promo for you. They cover everything from paranormal, creepy stories. They'll do some creepypasta. And they also talk about men's mental health, which is a really big thing. So here is Middle Aged and Creeped Out.
Hey guys, this is Todd, Sean, and Nate, and we are from the Middle Aged and Creeped Out podcast. We drop full episodes every Wednesday night or Thursday morning, and our middle-aged mini-episodes drop on Saturday afternoons at 3 o'clock.
And if you enjoy discussions about the paranormal, weird, unexplained, and just plain creepy, then check out our show. You can find us however you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like what you hear, don't hesitate to give us a 5-star rating and review. Telling a friend, family member, or even a coworker about us helps the show.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching Middle Aged and Creeped Out. And our TikTok is @Mako Podcast, and that's with 2 A's.
Well, Nate, what do you think?
That's the end of our promo, and that's a wrap.
Well, there you go. So until next time, creepies, Nate is your sound engineer. We are your hosts, Todd and Sean.
And they are middle-aged and creeped out. Keep it creepy.
All right, so check them out, Middle Aged and Creeped Out. They're everywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to them. This week's featured story is coming in from Brenna.
My name is Brenna, and I'm from Ohio.
Brenna, you said something a minute ago that I'm very interested in. You said you see things.
Yeah, I see ghosts in my house. So I just kind of see them standing there. Sometimes they'll walk by, but they never talk or really do anything.
How many of them are there?
There's probably like 4 different ones, but I never see them at the same time.
Really? But you did say that you saw somebody running? There was somebody running?
Yeah, so I see this woman dressed in all white, and she runs past my window, like, all the time, outside.
Have you ever like looked at the history of your house or anything like that on what that could be? Or
So I went to a psychic one time, and she told me that she thinks that before my house was there, that there used to be someone else that lived there, and she's just kind of on the property.
Thank you so much, Brenna. And if you want your story to be one of our featured stories, make sure you send me an email at firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and we can get it all set up for you. All right, I want to get to my guest. Join me by the fire as we welcome Chris Balzano. He is an author of over 11 books. His newest is Haunted, Ocala National Forest. He's also a podcaster. His show, Tripping on Legends. Chris, are you with us?
Yes, how are you tonight?
Very good, man. Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on your special Father's Day edition.
That's right. Special Father's Day edition of Fireside Paranormal. And it's fun. You know, I got Sarah here with me, too.
Hey, everybody.
So, hi, Sarah.
Hello, Sarah.
All right, tell me about your new book, Haunted, Ocala National Forest.
Wow. Okay, so it's it's part of the Haunted series, you know, the Haunted America series, and it began as a very weird story. Like a lot of these types of books, like a lot of ghost books, they don't really have an origin story, right? It's like, well, it's they wanted a book about that area, and I wrote a book about that area, and there you go. It's, you know, the geographical profile, but this one actually begins with a story, right? So,
okay,
I was a paranormal writer, paranormal investigator for years, and I kind of gave everything up, and I came back to kind of offer a different perspective on a ghost story, right?
okay.
So rather than being an investigator, I switched to what's called legend tripping. And this was even before I officially started the show Tripping on Legends. And the idea was to kind of put away all the equipment and focus on haunted legends, right? So what are the haunted legends that are being told in your town? And I wanted to know about all these different haunted legends from all these places. And I live in Florida, so within Florida. And then I wanted to go and experience the haunting rather than trying to investigate it. Go out there and experience it just the way the people in the town say that it exists. And through that, I wanted to tell the story of the town. I wanted to tell the story of the haunting, which means that, you know, it's 3/4 research and 1/4 field work, right?
Okay.
And in doing that, not only am I telling a ghost story, but I'm also giving a lot of history, but also giving a picture of what this town is like. So it's a travel guide as much as it is a ghost story. And so I wanted to start this project. And so I thought the only way I could do it was because I wanted legends that the towns knew, but maybe weren't necessarily as popular as they had made it already to 100 books, right?
Okay.
And so I started reaching out to librarians, and I got almost no responses from librarians about weird stories from their town, except for from this town called Astor, Florida, which is this small, creepy little town with, on the other side of Orlando. So it's in Central Florida. And not only did they respond and say they had some legends they wanted to tell me, but they asked me, "Hey, do you want to come speak at our library?" And I'm like, I don't.
That's
what are you
cool.
talking about? Like, I'm not even doing anything yet. This is the beginning of the project. When I got there, I realized it's because it is one of the creepiest places on Earth.
And what is it called?
It's Astor, Florida, like a star, Astor, Florida. And so we drive up there to do this little presentation and to hear their stories. And when we got there, we took some promotional pictures, right? Because it took us a few years to actually end up getting out there, because we had started the show by then. And I started to notice that every picture, no matter where we took it from, even though it was morning time, it was bright, it was a hot Florida day, all the pictures were coming out dark. And then before we got in, we were just kind of having a conversation before we entered, and I noticed that the the waves the sound waves between the two of us were getting lost, right? Like there was this weird echo thing happening that shouldn't happen when you're having a conversation with someone who's a few feet away from you,
Well, that's weird.
and you're not in the middle of a cavern. And so I said, weird things are happening in this place. Like there's something weird going on with sound waves, with light waves. And then when we got in, everybody had a story about something weird that was going on. And everybody was finishing each other's sentences, even though they didn't necessarily know each other. They weren't friends with each other. These stories had become such a part of who the town was that they were, oh, yeah. And then this happened with that. Oh, but did you also hear this part of the story? And it was going back and forth, and we left there, and I said, there's something unusual about this town. And the more research I did, I started to realize that this town is on the edge of the Ocala National Forest, that this was the kind of thing that was happening in all of these little towns that call this forest home.
Wow.
And that not only were these weird little kind of dimensional pocket things happening, but also there were a ton of ghostly legends. And I said, there's something weird about this, something weird going on here that I feel like I need to dig into a little bit more. And the more I uncovered, the more that I started looking into it. That famous saying, when you look into the abyss, it looks back. The more I looked into the weird there, the more I started getting contacted by people. And it kind of just, I understood that I had to try to work my way through it in writing. And, one of my first books is, if people in the audience are familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle, it's about the Bridgewater Triangle. It's about one specific town. It's an apex of the triangle called Freetown. And when I started writing that book, I was experiencing the same kind of thing in terms of the weirdness, not in terms necessarily of the light and the sound and stuff, but in terms of all this weirdness. Everything was going on in this town. Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings and Pukwudgie sightings and zombies and ghosts. But then there were all these weird cult murders. So there was and I'm talking, when I say cult murders, I mean like multiple different groups that had been using the forest for these nefarious things. And I noticed that all of this crazy stuff was going on. And I started to think, can the same thing that is drawing in or drawing juice from this forest for these weird things, in a paranormal sense, could it also have an impact on the average person? Or
I was going to ask, how did it make you feel?
Is the crime connected to it? And stuff like that.
I was going to ask.
What were you asking?
That's okay. How did it make you feel? Like did you have a different feeling when you were there than when you weren't there?
In the Ocala, I would definitely say yes. In Freetown, before I'd ever stepped into the trees, I had already done so much research that I think I was looking at it analytically, and it took a while for me to realize that, okay, this place feels off too. With the Ocala, I don't think that I've ever gone there where either something hasn't gone wrong, something almost always goes wrong, whether I get a flat tire or I lose something, or my GPS goes and I get stuck in the middle of nowhere. But more importantly, when I was looking into a lot of these ghostly legends, and I would be literally on the site of where this legend takes place, you get a constant sense that you're being watched. And so that's the kind of feeling that I get from the Ocala.
Now, let me ask you this: with Ocala itself, do you feel like there's cult activity there as well? Like in your first, was it the Bridgewater Triangle?
Yeah, it's called Dark Woods, the first one. Yeah, it is. Well, what I was going to say is I originally started to do this book as almost like Dark Woods 2, looking into the connection between all of these things. And it actually, in the Ocala, it's so much more. There's so much more involved in it that I ended up becoming overwhelmed. It took me over 2 years to write this book, which is big. Once you have the stories and you know what you're talking about. My book right before that, Haunted Florida Love Stories, I had done almost all those stories and researched them and legend tripped them, and it took me about 3 months to write. Right, so that's a pretty short amount of time, but 2 years is really long to be working on one project for me. And that was a lot of that had to do with because the dimensions and the nature of the cult activity in the Ocala is so much more complex and so much more involved in what it is. And I would also say that in Freetown, it was an organized cult that was doing the majority of the work, and it was very transparent. Not transparent in terms of you could find it easily, but in terms of it was pretty much a criminal empire that was working alongside this idea of Satanism, right? And so the people who were doing it were Satanists, but they were primarily criminals. You have that in the Ocala, but you've got multiple people doing it at that high level. But then there's also something mystical about it that Freetown never had, but that the Ocala has in spades. Like it's so much more complex that I couldn't do much more than brush by it and use it as context for the other stuff that was going on because it was too big to write about.
Now, I know there's like differences in cults. There's like good cults and there's bad cults, right? Like,
sure.
With the ones that you encountered there, would you say they were? Well, I know you said the one, was a criminal empire, but for the majority, do you feel like they were good cults, bad cults? Just organized communities that follow their leader, or are they drinking Kool-Aid? Like,
it's all the Kool-Aid. Are we talking about the Ocala or Freetown?
Well, I was asking about Ocala, but you can talk about both.
Yeah, so in the Ocala, there's one primary cult that's there, which people you can view it as a cult or not a cult, and it's known as the Rainbow People. And these are groups of people who gather in different parts across the country, actually across the world, and it's generally peace loving, and it is. It's a known thing, and they do it the same time every single year. They do it in the same places all across the country, and they gather together. And it's a call back to the hippie days, right?
Okay.
Well, in the Ocala, because it's Florida, they don't leave, right? So while there is this bloom during the actual rainbow days, a lot of the Rainbow People don't leave the Ocala, so they live there permanently.
Like in the forest?
However, yeah, like in the woods, yeah. Now, the difference is that that group of people, it's not like they have badges, and it's not like they have membership cards. So there's a lot of people who are doing some sneaky stuff, who are doing it under the guise of being Rainbow People. Like they present as if they are Rainbow People. They ask, and these are the kinds of stories that I was getting a lot of. Our friend went with these Rainbow People and he was never seen again.
Oh,
right. Or we would come across these people and we assumed that they were Rainbow People, and we saw that they were they had these people hanging from trees.
Gosh.
And so it was. Right, so I'm not talking about a whole bunch of people, listening to Iron Maiden and cutting pentagrams into themselves. I'm talking about, a weird religious type thing, and that's only one cult that's active in the forest. And so a lot of these groups of people, they go into the forest to worship. They go into the forest to conduct ceremonies because you can get lost there very easily if you don't know where you're going. But if you know where you're going, you can intentionally get lost and not be seen doing what you're doing by anybody. So there are all these multiple things around. Now within those groups, and this is very complex. If we were doing video, I would be drawing you a diagram that would look like I was crazy. Within those groups, which is what you had in Freetown, within those groups there are larger, more complex, more anonymous groups that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So these people, even within, who say like, well, we're just the Rainbow People, or we're an offshoot of the Rainbow People, they don't know that the things that they're being asked to do are part of a larger scheme that's being designed by the people who are the real cultists and the real evil people who are running things through the forest. So you have a lot of things like obviously drugs, obviously human trafficking. If you live in Florida, and of course me writing on the subject would notice it more. You know, we all hear the Florida man stories and stuff like that, right? But if you listen to crime stories, like true crime stories, either it's on the news or true crime podcast, you start to hear the Ocala mentioned a lot. You know, she was last seen in the Ocala, or they were able to speak to someone who lived in Leesburg, and Leesburg is in the Ocala. Like, you start to notice that a lot of crime in the state runs through that forest. And so, you know, when I spoke to people, they would tell me that, well, a lot of that has to do with cults that are there. Now, whether that's true or not, the idea, which is kind of in the book, is this forest is so oppressive on people's minds, or so forward in people's minds, that no matter what happens, they blame the forest for it, right? Like, if something weird happens, they connect it automatically. It's like, yep, that's what you get for living in the Ocala. So that's really kind of what the spirit I wanted to capture in the book.
Like, I didn't even expect this to get into like the cult talk, but like, I think it's really interesting that all this is happening in the national forest, and you hear of so many missing people that happen in national forests and things like that, that it makes sense that there would be this kind of activity as well.
And that's the other part of the forest that very quickly I kept hearing the same kind of story, which in the book I label it the shift, right?
Okay.
And so the shift is the Ocala, unlike Freetown, the Ocala has a constantly changing landscape. It's fluid. So people who live near there, it's their backyard, right? Like, so they hop on their dirt bikes, they hop on their ATVs, they grab their gun to go hunting. They go on the same trails all the time. They go off the trails because they don't like the back of their hand. And then they go a week later and the path isn't there anymore. And then they go 2 weeks later. Oh, yep, there's the path. Yep, okay, there you go. Or hunters will be looking for something and they'll say, like, well, you know what? We're putting a tree stand in right here. I'm clicking it on my GPS so that I can always find it. And then they go back and it's not there. Okay, well, maybe someone tore it down. Nope.
Wow.
They go back a month later and the tree stands there and it's been untouched. And so there's this constant shifting that happens there that people have kind of grown to accept. And so oftentimes, if you say to someone, like, yeah, there's a lot of missing people, they're like, well, you know, they just kind of get swallowed up. Like, well, what do you mean they get swallowed up?
Swallowed up.
They fall into some kind of vortex, right? Or they fall into some kind of they accidentally step into some kind of veil, and maybe they'll come back, maybe they'll be seen again, and you know, that's the kind of, if you're into the whole missing 411, it's one of those things kind of put forward in there once you get past the factual stuff, that there are these people they enter one place and they come out another place, and it could be 3 years later, and then they finally find like their remains or something, someplace where there's no way they could have been there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that happens in the Ocala all the time, and it's just a backdrop to the story. Like, people just naturally accept that kind of thing happens.
That's incredible. How big is the Ocala?
It is. I always get this wrong. I believe it is 300 square miles, 300 square miles.
There's this 300 square foot spot.
It's
all hell breaks loose.
It's really small. It's really small, but I am horrible with numbers. And I was doing an interview, and someone asked me what it was, and I was like, "Oh, it's, you know," and I said what I thought it was. I think I said 500. And they came back and they're like, well, it's 500 kilometers. But and I'm like, well, yeah, I was, you know, that was for our Canadian audience right there. I said, you know, that. So, but it's interesting because, I mean, I'm looking at a map, you know, of it right now. So here's the deal. The Ocala is the Ocala. But then you have all of these towns that surround the Ocala who are what I call in the shadow of the Ocala. So if you look at like where the trees end, well, you don't think of like Daytona Beach, for example, as being a place where you're in the middle of a forest, and you're not, but you're on the edge of the Ocala, right? Like, there are parts of that county that are in the trees and part of that county that's not, but they all kind of consider themselves in the shadow of the Ocala.
Okay.
Well, then if you go to the west side of that and to like the Gulf side of it, you have this area that's known as the Green Swamp, right? And the Green Swamp is kind of what the book that I'm writing now is focused on that. And I ended up cutting all of my Green Swamp stuff. But those people consider themselves in the Ocala, especially considering that this Green Swamp area is not, I mean, physically, it's not that far from where you would consider the end of the Ocala, but it's also connected underneath by phosphorus mines. And so you have, when you say how big is the Ocala, you could look at a green spot on a map and say, well, that's the Ocala. Oh, and there's another forest here. But the radiation that comes from there, the radiance of it, and oftentimes actual radiation, it spreads farther than the actual square mileage of the forest. So you can really think of all of Central Florida as kind of being in the shadow of this forest.
So do you think it's the forest itself that is kind of creating this atmosphere, or do you think there's something else, like you said, maybe connecting under it? Is there something maybe underneath that's really causing the...
Yeah, I don't know what the difference in those two things are. You know, like, I think it's, you know, and I've been asked these kinds of questions for years about the Bridgewater Triangle, right? Like, you know, why this place, or what is it about this place? And it's really, I think that it bleeds from the middle, right? So if the forest itself is the infection, right, then the things that run underground are the veins. Then the rivers that touch upon it or that run through it are the arteries, right? And all these small towns are the extremities. And so I feel that whatever weirdness, whatever darkness is in that forest is from the forest, but all of the natural things that kind of extend from it help it to kind of get its fingers in all of these other places.
That's
yeah. And here I just wanted to write a ghost book. You know what I'm saying? And I can never do anything simple, it seems.
So, I mean, why did you try to cram it all into one book?
It was too much. Well, the first thing is that, you know, the Sumter County story. The Sumter County is the Green Swamp area.
Okay.
It's a different story. And it's to be honest with you, it's not a story that I think a major publisher wanted to tackle the way that I wanted to tackle it. Okay. And so, you know, one of the hard things about writing the Ocala book is what I was getting stuck on was this idea of everything I've just told you. That's not, I call it JAG. That's not just another ghost book, right? Like, that's a pretty complex thing going on. Some theories are being thrown out there, but the average person wants to open up a book and be kind of freaked out about these small stories about towns that they've heard of, right? Or they want to, like, oh my word, I know that, I know that area. I live in that area. I want to buy that book. We want to tell each other ghost stories, and to be able to write that kind of book and publish that kind of book leaves a lot of this kind of stuff out, right?
Okay, yeah, because it's so complex.
Yeah, it's so complex, and it's also, you know, if you and I've got nothing but respect for, you know, the Haunted America series. This is my second book in the series, and you know, they have hundreds and hundreds of books. It's about every geographical area you can think of, right? Like, you're in West Virginia, so I guarantee you there's a Haunted America book about where you live, right? And they're really good books, and they're really good quality product, and they look good, they feel good, and they touch, and people love them, and you can go to Walgreens and buy it. But I think that there are some stories in the Ocala that are not Walgreen rack types of stories. And I think that it would be, some people would open it up and be like, this is not what I wanted from this book, which is perfectly fine, but I want to write that book too. So some of the stories didn't end up making it in. So that's kind of the easiest way to answer the questions.
All right, so I want to know, what is your favorite story that's not in the book?
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to leave all of the Sumter County stories out, because that's one big story, and so it's a cheat. So it's a cheat to say that, right? But I would say the story that didn't make it, the story that didn't make the book was the last story I was working on. It takes place in Daytona Beach. It's a story of Lillian Place. Kind of. It's a story of Lillian Place. So there is this historic house, which right now has actually become very popular. You can go there and ghost hunt for the night and all this kind of stuff like this. But this was about 2 years ago that I discovered it, before they had kind of opened it up for that kind of stuff. And it began with a bridge story. So they had just built this new bridge, and people, these are newspapers now, were anticipating whether or not the Phantom Hitchhiker would appear on this bridge because it was new, right? Like, with the new bridge, will the ghost be following? That was the kind of hook for me, because, you know, like my ears pronged up, like, whoa, I love a good hitchhiker story. Okay. And so across this bridge, for the previous two, there had been this woman who would be dressed in black, who people would stop, and she's this beautiful woman, beautiful blonde woman, and they would stop, and she would say, I'm trying to get home. I'm trying to get to the homecoming dance, or I'm trying to get back from the homecoming dance. So very much like Resurrection Mary and 1,000 other hitchhiker stories. The more I started to research it, the more I realized that there were at least 2 or 3 other types of ghosts, that the woman was different. Not everyone was seeing the same woman. But it also seemed to be connected to this place that was right on the edge of the water called Lillian Place. And one of the major connections was a man had gotten hit by a car, and he had an out-of-body experience. And so he started rising above himself. He was looking at himself on the bridge, hit one leg already severed, and his friend dramatically trying to save his life. And all of a sudden, almost instantly, he was in the top tower of this place known as Lillian Place at the Widow's Walk. And there was this woman in black, this beautiful woman, who had a whole conversation with him about whether or not he wanted to go back to Earth or whether he didn't. And then all of a sudden, his father, who had passed a few years earlier, started walking up the stairs towards the Widow Peak for him, the Widow's Walk for him, saying, "Son, no, you've got to go back. You're not finished yet." And then, bam, the man instantly is back on the bridge. He's noticing himself being brought into the ambulance. A few years later, he goes to Lillian Place with his daughter, and he knows every single room in the place. Like, it's like an inherent knowledge. And so now I'm looking at Lillian Place, and I'm reading through a century worth of ghost stories and weird things that are happening there, right? And everything from a woman who on Christmas morning pulled a practical joke where she hung every single thing in the house upside down, to a ghost that vacuums, to this woman who is on the Widow's Walk, who lost the man she loved, who never came back from war, and now every time there's a wedding, because it was holding ceremonies, she's up there at the Widow's Walk, to this absolutely heartbreaking story about a woman who had to give up her son, and he was staying at Lillian Place. So he was an orphan, and they kind of were taking in orphans at that time. But because he was a guy and the rest of the kids were girls, he had to sleep outside, right? Well, eventually his mom starts to visit him at night. And so she crosses the bridge every night, or, once a week to start out. And they talk to each other, and they laugh and they play. And as the sun starts to rise, she kisses him on the forehead, and she goes back across the bridge. And it's like, "I'll see you next week." And then eventually she stops coming because she's killed in an accident on the bridge. And she's the woman that's walking on the bridge trying to get back to her son, who she never can. And so, if you can already tell from hearing all these stories, there were all of these different legends about these 2 different locations, and they were connected, and they were amazing. Go to the house and walk the new bridge. We actually did a whole episode of Tripping on Legends on it, and the way that it came to me was very quick, and all of a sudden I was getting these primary sources on it, as well as people telling me stories. And then, which is the hardest thing for me, I'm trying to write this for the book, and I couldn't figure out how to tell the story, right? Like, you and I talking in a conversation like this, it's easy for me to throw all that stuff out there, right?
Yeah,
And but
writing it down and making sense.
Yeah, if you're reading it in a book, you're like, dude, does this guy know what he's talking about? Because whereas the story is complex, there are aspects of it that I get very enthusiastic about. I couldn't figure out how to tell a story as one story, right?
Yeah.
As a story that had a narrative line to it that's like, here, let me tell you a ghost story. And I just couldn't perfect it, and so it didn't end up making it to the book. And I do it in presentations. I go across the state doing library presentations, and I always throw Lillian Place in there because I'm trying to perfect how to tell that story, and I haven't gotten there yet.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it's a perfect combination of two haunted locations. It's a real place. You can research all of these different aspects of it. The story of the guy and his near-death experience is told 2 or 3 different places. It's by the guy, and it's, he uses different words to describe things, so it's like a genuine story, or it feels like a genuine story, and yet, it's really hard to tell it.
I think my favorite version of it, though, is the mom, because as a mother, you think of the powerful urges, the love that you have for your kids and the imprint that can leave on a place. And I think that makes the most sense to me as a mom.
And it connects, it unifies the bridge and the house story. Yeah, that's usually what I do. Is when I tell it live, I get into all the aspects, because there's a ghost of Lucy, there's a ghost of Lillian, there's a ghost of Lily, and then that woman's name is Lillian. That's how I end the story. I end it with but the story that I believe is really true is, and then I tell the story of the mother visiting her son.
Now,
so I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Time frame with these, how long ago did these happen?
They were the first family. They were the Thompsons, I believe. They were the first family in Daytona, or on this island in Daytona. So that first generation, the people who built Lillian Place and then Hotchkiss House, which is right next to it, I believe they were in 1889 when the actual house kind of first went up. Okay. And the other part of the story, which I always try to figure out how am I going to squeeze it in. If you, I'm not, Jordan, how old are you?
37.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you had to read Red Badge of Courage when you were in high school.
No.
But that was standard reading, and having, gotten a degree in literature, I had to read Open Boat, because that's considered one of the best short stories ever written. The author, Stephen Crane, actually stayed in there and wrote the first parts of Open Boat at Lillian Place, because he had just gotten into a shipwreck, and one member of the crew that he was with died, and they were all brought to Lillian Place to recover before they were brought to the hospital before he went back to New York. So that's old. It's Stephen Crane, 1860s, 1870s kind of old.
That happened a while ago.
Yeah, which, if you're from Massachusetts, you're like, okay, my library was, older than that. But for Florida, that's pretty old.
For those of you that are listening, or rather, Chris, I'll direct it to you. For the people listening, when you talk about legend tripping and things like that, how would you define what legend tripping is?
The best definition of legend tripping is the Oviedo lights, right? And you have this place where you are, no matter where you are in the country, no matter where you are in the world. The Oviedo lights was a place where these strange balls of light would appear in the sky. And unlike other orbs or ghost lights, or however you want to define them, that people sometimes see, these were not only constantly around, or they were consistent, I should say at least, in being around. They would play with each other. So it's not like there were just these random lights in the sky and then they would go away. There would be a light show, right? They would seem to be dancing with each other. Some nights there were 2, some nights there were more. And the big thing to do on a Saturday night in Central Florida was to hop into your car, go to this part of the bridge, this one road that leads into Oviedo where there's a bridge. Park your car. There might be 30 or 40 other people out there, and you would watch the lights. That is a legend trip, right? So there's a legend that's in your town. And whether it's like a badge of honor to go do it, or it's just something that, those crazy kids are doing, it's the idea that you go into the cemetery. Everyone in town knows if you go into the cemetery at midnight and you look at the statue will start to whisper to you. Or in its basic form, there's a creepy house down the street, and if you really want to be one of the cool kids, you go and you knock on the door 3 times. That is the essence of a legend trip. You go to someplace, you do something, you become totally submerged in what the legend is.
Uh-huh.
You don't try to capture evidence of it. You don't try to limit it. You don't try to investigate it. You just experience it the way that people have been experiencing it, sometimes for generations.
Now, something interesting you were talking about with those lights. I don't know if you've ever really looked into the West Virginia area at all, but John Keel, when he wrote Mothman Prophecies, he talked about how people would go along the river and watch, and he called them UFOs, dancing in the sky and playing with each other,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's and then you have the with the Brownsville lights are kind of famous ones. There's another one in Florida on the actually not that far away from the Oviedo lights, near a place called Tomoka Park. These are they could just be scientifically explained away, right? And we can do that, although the science of that to me doesn't seem all that it doesn't hold the test for me, because things like ball lightning or swamp gas or St. Elmo's fire, those things don't necessarily take into account that these balls of light have personality, or that they leave. You know what I'm saying? Like that they actually come to the road from across the bridge, or that they go into the trees, rustle around, and then like dart off quickly like you would expect like a UFO to do, for example.
Uh-huh.
A lot of different places have this. It's just, what is the backstory that they tell you? So the fact that the lights exist, and that when I say that these lights were popular for people to do, I found old copies of the UCF, University of Central Florida newspaper, before it was University of Central Florida. And in these newspaper clippings from the 50s and 60s, they would have advertisements saying like, okay, we've got a bus of people who are going to go see the Oviedo Lights this Saturday, or the art club is sponsoring a special event for the Oviedo Lights. Pay $5 and you can they'll set up an easel for you at the Oviedo Lights so you can try to paint them. I mean, it was like one of those things where people did it. But then the urban legends sneak into it, right? Well, the original light was a man who committed suicide when he returned from World War II to find that the woman he loved had married someone different. And so he committed suicide by hanging himself from the bridge. And he was the first Oviedo Light. Where do the other ones come from? Well, I'm glad you asked, because one night there were a group of cowboys, Boy Scouts,
a bunch of cowboys,
and they became mesmerized by the Oviedo Lights, and they got lost in the forest, and they were never found again. And when they died, their souls became the next lights. And well, what about those other lights? Well, those other lights, one of the favorite things to do was to, rather than take the woman you liked to the movies, you take it to the Oviedo Lights, because, hey, you're already in the car and it's already dark and she's a little scared, so you know what's going to happen next. That's perfectly fine. But some of those people, they were too involved in what they were doing, and they shouldn't have been doing it anyway, and so the lights got to them. And so it goes from just being this maybe natural phenomenon, maybe supernatural phenomenon, to the source of all of these different legends about what these lights are and what these lights can do to you. And that's what makes it even more special.
So your personal opinion, what do you think the lights are?
Who cares? It's not up for me to say. No, as the investigator part of me would have always been to what are these things, right? Like, to get to the truth of things. As a folklorist and as a legend tripper, I would never want to say what I think something is, because then that would exclude all the other legends that are surrounding it. So whenever I go to any of these things, I'm never trying. Even when I was an investigator, I hated the word debunk. but I'm never trying to prove any of these legends right or wrong or say what the legend actually is. I try to bring interesting aspects of the legend out that people might not have known, or like, but did you know that this is, and sometimes I do say, people tell this story, but like I did research and that person never existed. However, and there's always a however, because I always say we can debate whether or not ghosts are real, but you can't debate whether a ghost story is real because people believe it and people tell it. And so it's always true. So I never try to say what my personal belief is on what it might be, because it's always, let's talk about all the possibilities that it could be.
That's really good, and it makes sense. And I think that's one of the absolute best answers that I've ever gotten on the show. What do you think it is? Who cares?
Yeah, and I hate to always sound like a jerk when I say that.
But it's so right.
It's because I'm a teacher, and so my students find out what I do, mainly because, I place posters of my books all over the room, so they have to know, right? But they always ask me, like, are ghosts real? And I say, do you think they're real? Or I'll tell them a ghost story from one of my legend trips, and they'll say, well, is that true? And I'm like, well, do you think it's true? Like, why do you think it's true? Like, it's true because people think that it is, right? It's true because, like, Santa is real because people celebrate him, right? And people make him. I'm not even talking like the tulpa aspect.
As I was going to say, you've created a Santa tulpa.
Yeah, I think a lot of these locations, locations, some of the stuff that happens there, it's because people are taking notice, and so they've created what they've talked about. But I'm not even talking about that aspect of things. It's just a story is true if you keep it alive, right? So that's always the best answer I can give.
Now, in your new book, how many stories do you think you have in it?
It's difficult to say because, once again, I didn't write it traditionally. So so rather than be like what a ghost book might be, right, which is, here is Tallahassee, and here are 5 stories about Tallahassee. Sometimes I start telling one story, and then I just break off and go into another story. So it's the beginning of me trying to do that, which is the book I'm working on now, is just all of that. So I would probably say there are at least 50 stories in there, because a lot of them have to do with, for example, there are a lot of sightings of shadow people there, right? Of shadow men there. And then there are a lot of sightings of shadow men with hats. So the chapter that is about that has, maybe one story, which is the big story of the chapter. But in telling that, I give you like 3 or 4 other stories that people talk about consistently in the forest about these, or places where people have seen a dark man with a hat, over years, and multiple people have seen it in the same location. So it's really hard to tell how many numbers, because you can't just go by the chapters. But there are, I would probably say there are at least 50 stories in there. And some of them, unlike what I did with Haunted Florida Love Stories, which is all haunted legends, some of these are people's firsthand experiences, and some of them are just ghostly legends. So there's a little mix of both of those in there. That's
so cool. Now, you say you're working on another book already?
I'm working on 2 actually right now. Yeah.
Goodness, what are they?
I'm a teacher, so it's summertime. What else am I going to do?
What are they about?
One of them is called Whistling Past the Cemetery, which is a play on the term whistling past the graveyard, which the term itself actually means to pretend as if something is not wrong when everybody knows that something is wrong. But whistling past the cemetery is a collection of legend tripping type stories from across the country that take place in cemeteries specifically.
Oh, wow.
So it is just, 100 stories from all across the country about your local cemetery, where people say, that if you go there and you knock on this mausoleum and ask the guy how he's doing, you'll hear a voice that says back to you, I'm doing just fine. Or just a few feet away from that mausoleum, there's this grave, and you're not supposed to stand between the sun and the grave. And if you do, then you're going to be cursed and you're going to die within a year. So it's all of those kinds of stories. So it's a fun little book about, what all these different places, and you could actually use it as a travel guide and go across the United States and try to go to as many of these cemeteries as you can, and try to jump over the grave 3 times so you can find out who you're going to marry. So that's the fun little one. And then the other one, like I said, is about it's about the other part of Florida, which is near the Ocala, and it's me trying to tell the story of a swamp witch.
Okay.
And it's a campground which has been reporting that there's this witch who appears to be stalking the people who are at the camp. And she's been known to, people see her kind of walking the path. They see this dark figure kind of like walking in the swamp area near the campground. She scratches on people's doors. They hear her laughing at night. She's been known to steal things from people. You'll start hearing this crazy screaming in the middle of the night, and you go out there and the screaming should be right where you are, like feet away from where you are, but there's nothing there. And I was told that story, and I found that story, and I wanted to legend trip it. I wanted to at least go experience it. I wasn't sure how, what I would do to kind of like
to entice the
activity,
witch.
right? Like, okay, what are we going to do? Just camp, I guess. We can camp. Like, that's the only... but it ended up becoming a much bigger story. And in telling that story, I have to tell, 15 other stories that are connected to it so people understand. So it's a book that's entirely me trying to tell that story from point A to point B, and me taking a really, really long time to get there, because there's all these other ghost stories you need to know to be able to fully understand it.
Now, have you already stayed at the camp? Have you already done that part of it?
I don't camp, man. I'm a city kid.
I love you,
no,
Chris.
I've been there. I've been there a few times, but I've never stayed overnight because I don't camp. Like, I just don't stay outside at night.
This is going to be another 2-year book, right?
No, which is not, and it's not because I'm scared. It's because, like, dude, like, we live in a civilization where we have houses. Like, go back to your house, man. So I have no problem in some of these locations. I have been out there until 5 o'clock in the morning, awake, looking into a legend or being deep into some place.
Uh-huh.
But I never like put a sleeping bag down, like, and that's just not the kind of person I am. But I have been there. You know what I think we should do? I think I'm going to tell you the story of when I first went there, but we're going to have that be a Patreon story. How about that?
All right, I'll take that.
Because it's a really great story, and it's the primary reason why I need to tell the story. But it's too long and involved for the interview. But we'll do it as a Patreon. I think that would be a really good idea.
That would be a lot of fun. Sarah's got a question.
So you might have answered it before, but what got you into legend tripping?
Doing it the way that I do it.
Yeah.
When I first started to get into the paranormal, and actually go out and seek the paranormal. Like, I was raised, I always say I'm in the first generation that was able to watch really inappropriate horror movies on HBO when our parents went to sleep, right?
I remember
like
those.
We're the first, like, I'm the first. It's funny because I was watching all of these, this interview with all these famous people talking about, like, the first time they had seen Friday the 13th, the first time they had seen The Exorcist. And I'm like, I was at a drive-in. Like, my parents took me to the drive-in, to like see the Fox and the Hound and The Exorcist. Like, it was crazy time. Or like Poltergeist on HBO when my parents went to bed, even though it was only PG. And just reading so much about ghosts as well, and just absorbing all that. Well, when I first started looking into ghosts, that's how I investigated, right? Like, I wasn't an investigator. I went out and I tried to, they say if you walk down this path, this would happen, and I would do it, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes that push to understand it. And it's like, okay, well, you know what? Why don't we investigate this? Well, how are we going to investigate it? How are we going to try to prove that the ghosts are there? And this was a little bit before ghost hunting technology became popular. And so we kind of invented our own ways of doing things. And then 10 years pass, and, you know, the TV show Ghost Hunters comes out, and ghost hunting becomes extremely popular, and investigating becomes popular. And now all of a sudden you're investigating, trying to help people out as well. And I just was looking around saying, well, we're not any closer to any answers. Not only that, but I feel like I've lost touch. Like, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, much more than I am an investigator. Why did I stop doing that? And so it was switching over to going back to legend tripping was my way of trying to catch the awe again. You know what I'm saying? Like, the special part of the paranormal. No one reads a book and wants to know what the K2 meter said, right? Like, they want to know the backstory. They want that twist at the end. It was like, and when we did the research, we found out a woman named Mary lived there 20 years ago. And you go, you know, that was
they
the
want
kind
the shivers up their spine.
Yeah, you know, and what I would call the heart of the haunting, like, or the story of the family who was going through it was more compelling to me. You know, whenever I watch those movies, I've only recently watched, like, the Conjuring movies because I'm not big into that kind of horror movie. And I was like, well, the movie sucks when the Warrens get there, man. Like, I want to see more crap happen to the family. Like, that's the stuff I like, you know? And so I realized that legend tripping was the best way for me to get back to that aspect of the paranormal, which was always what I'm interested in. And I think really what other people are interested in too.
So you like the experience, not the why.
I definitely am much more about the experience. Yeah. You know, I mean, when you fall in love, do you go, why, or do you want the experience of being in love, right? Like, when you laugh, when you hear a joke, do you want to stop and say, well, let me analyze why that joke was funny? No, you just want to laugh, right? Like, so we oftentimes in the paranormal, in this push to have what we do or what our obsession is, gain credibility, as if we need to validate the fact that we like ghosts, right? In that push to have it be, we've become so serious, right?
Yeah.
And we've become so consumed with doing things the right way and doing things in a transparent way and it's like, well, yeah, but in that you lost the fact that, you know, that you should have awe for this paranormal that's going on, or, you know, the fact that these are potentially real people who went through this. What you're experiencing could be the what's left over of someone's emotions. And that's really, really heavy stuff. Why are we leaving that part out to try to understand it?
Chris, can you talk about your show a little bit? I want to make sure you have time to plug that.
Yeah, Tripping on Legends is a passion of mine. I know it's a passion of mine because I have to keep doing it, right? Like, I've tried to fold it up a few times and stop doing it. And it just keeps rearing its ugly head and demanding to be done. It's a podcast that I always say, it's, you know, unscripted, but always well-researched. And it is looking at the ghostly legends, originally just of Florida, looking into the ghostly legends, and we break down the story. Here's the story. Here's what people are experiencing. Here's the history that leads into it. Here's, like, what builds the story. Here's, like, the atmosphere that it is. Here's what the town is like. And then we always try to go out and experience the haunting, just like we're talking about, and then we report back to what happened, right? So that's the primary push of the show. But in doing that, because it's harder and harder to get out there and, you know, life interferes, the show also just covers legends and ghostly legends and what they're about. So I am particularly obsessed. One of the reasons why I came back into the paranormal was the Slender Man case. I became obsessed with Slender Man.
No, I'm not familiar.
You're not familiar with? Okay, maybe I'm saying it. Maybe you can't hear. I'm saying Slender Man. Slender Man.
Oh, I thought you said Thunder Man, like lightning and thunder.
I know you're not. Which is why I realized it was a problem with me, because I say that and people go, "I'm not familiar with that." And I go, "I'm saying you're not hearing me the right way. Then it must be my boss coming out." Yes, Slender Man.
That I've heard of. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I knew you had to have, right? So it was the idea that I wanted to. First of all, I mean, Slender Man is completely just the same way we're talking about these legends, and just the way we're talking about Santa. Like, Slender Man is a real thing, right? It's a real thing that exists, regardless of whether we can capture it and whether we can find its origins and all that. I mean, it's just something that has been in folklore and in horror and in urban legends for years, right? For decades, long before the actual Slender Man attempted murder case. But I became obsessed with, well, why these girls, but why girls of that age? Because what didn't get reported as widely was that there was a series of crimes in China committed at almost the exact same time, both crimes, assaults, and suicides that involved a character that was very much like Slender Man. And the age group that was affected, both here in America and then over in China with this similar legend, were the ages of 10 to 12-year-old girls, or 9 to 12-year-old girls. And it was a very, very specific demographic, which also happened to be the demographic that I was teaching at that time. And so I have since then been obsessed with modern urban legends and modern urban legend storytelling. So we get into a lot of that on the show as well, especially because my sometimes co-host is my 13-year-old daughter, who's at the cutting edge of all of this stuff. So one episode might be us looking at, an urban legend or a ghostly legend that takes place in the Florida Keys, and the next episode is my daughter and I doing an in-depth investigation of the back rooms. So It's kind of anything. If you like legends, if you like spooky stuff, it's one of those things where, you might not like this episode, but the next episode's going to hit you where you like it.
Now, where can they find it?
You can get it anywhere where you find your podcast. So iTunes, Google Play, run everything except for Spotify, because I do video, and so Spotify doesn't like video. So it's not a political statement or anything like that. Spotify just doesn't like the show because I do the show live on Tuesdays at 8:30 from Facebook and Instagram. So the Facebook is facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And then the Patreon is Spooky Tripping. So I go live most Tuesdays at 8:30. And then I like that video. And so I don't want to lose that video. So I post that up as the podcast as well. So no matter where you get your podcast, other than Spotify, you can find the show.
Very cool. Chris, we are out of time for this week. Every time you have a book, I want you on. You're just always a blast to talk to.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. I'll have to come on 2 times if I get both of these books done this summer.
Guest book twice. Hey man, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys very much for having me on. It was a great time.
Hey, and we'll talk to you later.
Good night.
Bye. And with that, the fire is out. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks, Sarah, for joining me today. Thank all of you for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. I will say, for those that are going to be listening to the Patreon, this is one of those after-interview Patreons that we go into a lot of stories, and it probably lasts. It was enough for a whole nother show, so check that out. Give us some feedback. If you haven't connected with us yet on any of the social medias, we got Facebook, Fireside Paranormal Hub. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. The Twitter handle is at Fireside Parapod, Parapod. The website is firesideparanormal.com. We got some really fun merch on there. And that is all the time we have for this week. So until next week, everybody, don't be afraid, only believe.